Hello and welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I am your host, David Polikoff. Yet another Capital Fire guy on the show with me. If you guys haven't figured it out by now, and I've said it 1,000 times, I'm very picky with my guests. I feel that it's my responsibility to make sure that we put a good message out there. That good message I know is going to resonate because they're my friends, my coworkers, the instructors that we work with, and I know that we're all kind of like-minded. So it tends to run along those lines, but I got Hank Henline on with me. Hank is one of our fellow instructors with Capital Fire with RJ. You guys aren't any stranger to RJ. So without me rambling on like I always do, Hank, welcome to the show. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. So yeah, I work with Capital. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I really haven't kept track of how much time it's been, how long I've been doing it, but it's been a few years and always having a blast whenever we do stuff with Capital. I'm a career lieutenant in Frederick County, Maryland, and I started in the fire service 16 and a half years ago, roughly 16 or 17, something like that. I'm not the greatest with math, but yeah, 16 years ago as a volunteer in Western Maryland, small town department. And yeah, I got two great kids. That's the most important part.
That you do. I met your kids. For kids, the young kids are very well behaved. I think behind the scenes, you're like, you better not embarrass me in front of my friends. No, your kids are good. They actually, I think the last time that we really hung out a lot was when we were out in Ridgely, and we were doing some RIT stuff, and you were doing some filming, and your daughter was there helping reset stuff, and your son was running around. I think my son may have been there also. I don't remember, but good kids.
Yeah, man, It's great. I love it when they like it too. It doesn't work out all the time. And sometimes if it's, an extended trip, I don't bring them, but they do like to come to the trainings once in a while. And I'll throw a helmet on the boy and let him hook some ceilings or break some props or whatever. And it's always a great time.
Being able to, and I think when you have kids, like even with the junior program that we have here in Sykesville, we have a junior program, having these kids be able to get tools in their hands and be able to break stuff without getting in trouble. I think that kind of takes them out of the norm. They're getting away from, from this thing on through the screens and the computers and stuff, and actually, getting tools in their hand and then teaching them something. And the cool part of it is that when you're hanging out with your friends and your kids are there and you start talking forcible entry or Halligan, they're like, I know what a Halligan is. Dad put one in my hand and I broke some shit. So it's kind of cool, but family's important. And like I said, I've bought my son a couple of times just some things, and he runs around like a maniac, like kids do. He's 17 now, so it's like he's all like, "Hey, what's going on?" type of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about, we always talk leadership and stuff like that, and that's where it always kind of goes. It's one of the backbones of the fire service, but like you and I talked offline, I want to talk a little bit about from a lieutenant's perspective, from an officer's perspective of, running calls. The biggest thing is the size up for the various structures, buildings, and things like that we run, just the various calls that we run and the size up. And everybody knows that the size up starts before the alarm ever comes in, whether you're doing pre-plans or things like that, or just through training. But I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about size up from a lieutenant's point of view. And I know you're a float lieutenant now, and you get to see most of Frederick, so you see a variety of things, anywhere from urban cities all the way up to mountains and rural areas. So, and there's everything in between, rivers and industrial and stuff like that. But let's key in on some of the bread and butter stuff. So, putting yourself in the front seat of an engine company and the bang out a house fire. What are some of the things that are going through your mind as a lieutenant? And unfortunately, you may not have the luxury of working on the same shift every shift, it could be new people, but you've been around long enough, so you know most of the people. So what goes through your mind when the tones drop? Or even let's move it forward. What are some of the things you say at the kitchen table in the morning? If you throw out little expectations. I know you're not trying to change the world, but what are some of the things that you may be throwing out in the morning even before those alarms come in?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I don't typically try to change a whole lot when I go into shifts because, like you said, I am a float lieutenant. I don't have a shift of my own yet. And every shift I work with different people. And then those people on that shift are in different positions, So if I do happen to come back and work with them again, they're in different riding positions for the day. With Frederick transitioning from 3-person engine companies to 4, most of them are at 4 now, but we're not standardized as far as what those positions do. So the first thing that I usually ask each crew is, how do you guys run this? Right. So the guy sitting behind the driver, is he E3, E4, And, is that the nozzle man or is that the backup man? Do you guys determine that based off of the side of the rig that you're pulling the line off of, or do you have a dedicated nozzle? Everybody does it a little bit different. So I try to figure that out first, and that helps me realize, who I'm working with and how they're going to navigate themselves on the call. I try not to change it a whole lot, but sometimes if they have a big algorithm of who's doing what, I will say, hey, can we simplify it for the day and let you be the nozzleman and you be the backup? Because it makes it easier on me, especially if I don't know your names. I know most people, but every once in a while there's somebody I'm not super familiar with, and it makes it easier so I can just, keep track of where everybody is. And then as far as like, I don't really give them a whole lot of expectations other than if we get a first due fire, you guys are all trained pretty well. You should be able to make a decision on where the line needs to go initially. If you're not sure, we get a cross lay to the front door while I'm doing a 360. And after the 360 is done, if I determine we need to go somewhere else, then we'll change it up. But yeah, it's, get a line to the door and, you can force the door if you need to, and then wait for me to finish, and then we'll go in as a team.
The couple things you said I wanted to touch on, and I'm writing stuff down, so I'm not being rude. I'm just writing stuff down because I don't. I forget. I'll be like, "What was I going to say?" One of the things you talked about was, who pulls the line. Depending on, it was the side of the rig the fire's on. I remember I ran a call here in Sykesville, and Eddie is the chief. We were just all sitting at the firehouse. They tapped out a house fire, and it was the career driver. Eddie was riding the seat, and I was in the back with another volunteer, senior guy. He works over in Baltimore County, and we knew we had fire. I mean, it was no doubt. You could see it from the station. We knew we had fire. And I leaned over to Ambush, and I said, "Hey, man, here's how we're going to do it." I said, "If the fire's on your side, I'll back you up. If the fire's on my side, you back me up." So Eddie's going down the road. He's looking at the map. He says, "Ambush, it's going to be on your side." So I'm like, "All right, I'm going to back you up." So we pull in. Well, the hydrant was on the other side of the road. So we took a quick, sharp turn. And Eddie turns to me. He goes, "Polikoff, it's you. It's you." So I pulled the line. And it was a really good fire, but it was just one of those things, changing on the fly. And it just kind of reminded me when you said, who pulls the line depends on what side of the thing it's on. But normally, you have something in place. Hopefully you have some type of framework. We call duties by positions. I know that we're not quite there because a lot of new people, we're jumping from rig to rig, depending on what's due, how many units that you have in your station. But just having that simple framework of, hey, if you're riding behind the officer, you're the lineman. If you're riding behind the driver, you're fourth. Typically, it might even be the paramedic also, and that's something that's important to know. So you need to know who's leaving my rig to go to the hospital and who's staying, type of deal. If we need to upgrade something like that, but just having so you can just turn over your shoulder and say, hey, we got work, the quarter of the front door, and who's pulling that line while you're doing your 360. The things that I like to do when we talked about expectations, I would tell my guys, here's what I want done if I'm riding the engine company. If I don't tell you anything else when we're going down the road, that's what you do. I said, if I have to change it up, I'll let you know we're changing the plan up. But for the most part, whatever we're running, need a line to the front door. Typically, it'll be your cross lane. And it kind of just takes that out because as the officer, I've done it 1,000 times, there's so much work that goes into riding the front seat now. It's not like it was back in the early 80s where you're blowing the siren and you're looking at the paper map and you're yelling at the guys, and that's pretty much it. There's a lot of stuff that's on your shoulders as the officer, not to mention, if the battalion chief's coming in, maybe he's a newer battalion chief, so he's a little nervous and he wants to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. So I think that what you said is important to there are stations where it can be kind of complex, who rides where, and you coming in there and saying, "Hey guys, just for today, can we make this real simple so I don't have to, if I don't even know your name, there's a lot of people are called Hey You." So let's make sure that we have the game plan down. I think that knocking that out right in the very beginning kind of lets everybody know, hey, he's on the ball. We're going to do it this way. He's not trying to change the world, but just for today, we're going to simplify things a little bit, and it'll be business as usual when the lieutenant or the captain comes back. So, okay, so you're running a call. So what are some of the things, telling the listeners out there, if you've got new people that are listening right now, they're thinking, you know what, I'd really like to be a lieutenant one day, or I want to ride the front seat. I want to do a good job, but we lack in that leadership training or that officer's training. What are some of the things that you would tell somebody? And what are some of the things you're looking for when they tap out that call, when you're talking about size up now that you're going down the road, what's going through your mind? What are you thinking about?
When we first hit the street, I really hope my driver knows where he's going. And that's just because I'm floating in a large county and we have a lot of stations. And, I work at all of them. And I worked at, station two for the past few years and I got to know that area pretty well. But, when I go across the county to a new station, especially one that I never spent any time at as a fireman, I might not really know anything. And a good example is a couple shifts ago, I was working at our station one, and the technician, he's got over 20 years on, I believe, and he's been spent the vast majority of his career at that firehouse, and he knows that first. It's probably the most complex first due, at least in the city of Frederick, and he knows it like the back of his hand. And that makes it so much easier on me. Now, I still try to verify. So I still pull up the active 911 on my phone and I still pull up the map on the MDT. I'm the kind of guy I like to cross reference. I use both as much as I can, but I verify with him. If it's a guy that I know is squared away and knows the area, I verify. I say, for example, I can't remember the name of the street, but it's, hey, this is off of XY Street down this direction, right? And he's like, yep. And I'm like, all right, cool. We're good. At least we're on the same page heading the right direction. And then, from there, I am focusing on figuring out where we're at in the running order to determine what our job is and then finding hydrants for that driver, if that's part of our job. So,
And funny story about that is that you actually had a working fire that day, and you had some asshole
yeah.
incident commander made you be the rapid intervention company, even though you got there before. So you can't always count on your buddies to put you to work. But no, it's funny because I knew it was you, and it was me, by the way, people are listening. So I knew it was you, but I'm thinking I need to make sure that I got a solid RIT team in place. And I'm not saying that as a cop out, but I knew it was you. I knew you were coming with a crew of 4, and I know what you're doing. And I had Kenny going around the back, so I know I had some leadership back there. But to me, it sounded like that fire was balloon frame, and it was on the first floor, and it was running up to the attic. So I really needed to have somebody solid in there in case, I had to put somebody in play right away. And I knew you guys were coming
Yeah.
with a crew of 4. So obviously it had nothing to do with you, but it ended up being kind of a nickel and dime fire anyway.
Yeah, it wasn't much. And it makes sense. I did ask to move, but for those who aren't aware of the incident, we had multiple units that didn't get out because we do some cross staffing. So some of the engine companies that were due, that crew was responding on a truck. And I knew it wasn't getting out. And it was kind of, I don't want to say in the middle of nowhere, but there was another call in the area going on. So the running order was all messed up. I just wanted to verify that I was going to be in the right position or the expected position. That's the only reason I really asked.
Yeah, but that all goes back to accountability. Had you said, "Well, I was dispatched as rapid intervention, but I'm arriving third or fourth. I'm just going to go do that." And next thing you know, that unit that was supposed to be fourth arrives fourth. Now nobody's the rapid intervention company, and it's important, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But having that rapid intervention company ready to go is extremely important. But yeah, you asked, and I'm like, nah, just stay where you are and get yourself set up, and you did. You guys bought a whole bunch of tools and things to the building to take care of anybody that went down. Yeah. So when the whole trust but verify thing, that's important for a couple of things. One, I had probably one of the most senior, best drivers, friend of mine, grew up with him when I was a captain in Rockville. He was driving me on the engine company, and I mean, he knew the area like the back of his hand. But I would always ask him. I was like, "Hey, Chuck," I said, "We're going down this way, and we're going to take a left, right?" He go, "Yep." I knew he knew, but I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. I wanted to make sure that I was right. And I'm like you. I don't use the MDT as maps. I have my phone, but I'm a paper map kind of guy because I'm kind of old. But I know the guys that wrote the maps that they're accurate. So I'll have like when I'm running something at Sykesville, I'll pull up the active 911 and let that map play, and I'll put it over in the cup holder next to the driver. Now he can hear his turns coming up, and now I'm in the paper maps and I'm looking at our route, which way we're going, and then maybe getting into the box map to figure out exactly where we are. I don't trust the MDTs too much. I don't think the maps are the greatest on any of the computed stuff, and it's only as good as the people that uploaded them, and those are people that work somewhere else in the county. But like you, I pull up multiple sources just to make sure that it's right, and I do verify with the driver that where we're going. That drivers make mistakes. I mean, I had a buddy that same driver. We made a mistake. We took a wrong turn going to a house fire, and we ended up on a dead end road. And of course, he gave him shit about it later. But it's like, no, man, we need to turn right around. We need to take a right back where instead of that left. But having it on the same page, I think, is important. So you're going down the road. You got your now you're looking at water supply. What are some of the things that you're thinking about with water supply? And let's talk a little bit about hydrants and not hydrants. You talked about the uniqueness of one's area. It goes from inner city urban to mountains and rural, where there's no hydrants. It's
Yeah.
it's Frederick is a unique place. I mean, at 1 minute you can be deep into urban row houses and whatnot, and take a couple left-hand turns. You're going up the side of a mountain where there's no hydrants or anything like that. So let's talk a little bit about water supply.
Yeah, that's probably my weakest part of being an officer is the rural water. It's easy with hydrants, man. Hydrants make your life easy. But what I tend to do, and this will actually circle back to your previous thought here, is I really rely on the paper maps for the non-hydrant areas because good luck finding a legitimate water supply, dry hydrants and stuff like that on the MDT. It's almost impossible. So I always have the paper maps sitting either in front of me or to the side. I don't always reference them, like I said, in a hydrant area, but for the rural areas, I do. I do for sure. And I always check the book in the morning because they're all set up slightly differently, right? That way I know how to navigate that book if I have to. But yeah, rural water is a completely different game.
One of the things we'll go back to water supply in a second, and I'm writing it down because again I'll forget. Checking those maps in the morning, and this goes out to the listeners out there, newer officers, even seasoned officers. The way I like to set my map book up is I'll open it up, especially if it's in an area that I'm not sure of. The map that's right around the station, the radius right around the station, because that's where you're going to have to know your lefts and your rights real fast, especially if you're only going 2 or 3 blocks. When you talked about being at station 2, you sneeze and three's in your pocket. You know what I'm saying? And same thing with 29 now. So having that map book opened up to the page where the firehouse, whatever page that firehouse is on, you've got those surrounding streets where you know how to get to wherever you're getting. So that's a little trick of the trade. Have your map book opened up for that immediate area right around the firehouse. The one thing that you talked about water supply is I always, like I said, I got in the paper maps also, because I know they're accurate because the guys at the station are the ones that built them. But even in the hydrant areas, I know where my hydrant is. But what if that hydrant doesn't work? And Frederick, the city is notorious for hydrants that may not work. Where's your next hydrant at? Or what if you need to go a block over or something like that? You got your water supply, but definitely with that rural water supply, you can pull up your map on your phone and take a look at it and go, oh, it looks like there's a pond right there. Well, that shit's been dry for God knows how long. But Google hadn't caught up with the mapping program yet. But most of those maps, especially in the rural areas, they have their water supply. They may be even written in the margins of where your two water supplies are, the closest water supply to the area that you're running. I think we have really honed in on the rural water supply in Frederick. Same thing here in Carroll of how we're doing it. We were so heavily relying on those folded tanks, and one person trying to wrestle that off the side of a tanker and get it set up, you're behind the 8 ball. So we really simplified it. Same thing here in Carroll. Same thing in Frederick is you look at your typical house fire, anything 500 gallons a minute or less, and we're going with tankers and hitting that Clapper Siamese all day long.
Yep.
You can even bump it up to about 800 gallons a minute, because if you've got enough tankers coming, you got enough engine companies there, you can get that water moving on a single family. Plus the amount of apparatus that's coming, plus the amount of tankers that are dispatched on a rural water supply. I mean, it's not out of the ordinary to have 4 or 5 thousand gallons sitting right in front of the house before anybody's ever hooked up to that Cloppered Siamese. And you think about a typical house, if you can't put it out with 4 or 5 thousand gallons of water, you're probably going to go defensive. I'm not saying all the time, but you're probably going to go defensive. But we've made it easy with the Clappered Siamese, and even if you listen to that fire that I ran with you guys the other day, when I pulled in the driveway and went on the scene, I said, hey, the Clappered Siamese is at the end of the driveway. Make sure you guys pump that Clappered Siamese. That's all I needed to say. And the tanker, the first engine went up. They laid out. The first tanker pulled up. They hooked up. They were the nurse tanker, and then that second engine, they didn't need to come up the driveway because it was only a 200-foot lay. So they went ahead and hooked right into that Clappered Siamese, and then everybody just pumped water. Man, I don't even think we emptied one tanker. That was it. But we've made it really easy. Really, I don't want to say dumb it down. That's not what it's all about. But it's more we've simplified it to make sure that we can get the maximum amount of water, so you don't have to do all this thinking. That those folded tanks. That's later on in the incident. Once we decide that that's what we need to do, you can always call for a couple more tankers so you can shorten up your round trip time to getting that water. To me, I had hydrants on every corner when I grew up. Transitioning to the rural water supply stuff, I tell you, I've been driving fire since I was 16, and I'm a little older than 16 right now. The first working fire that I had to be the pumper to draft out of folding tanks on a rural water supply was 7 years ago. 7 years ago, and I'm happy to say that I did it. All the training and everything came back, but that was the first rural water supply pump operation I ever did. Was 7 years ago. I've been in the fire service since '87 as a career guy. I've been a volunteer since '84, '85. So training, you can't let you can't let that scare you. You gotta embrace it and say, what am I gonna do with this? And just kind of go over that in your head. Obviously, you've had enough runs now where it seems like majority of the runs we're running now are outside of the city in areas where you may have to do whether or not be relays or that rural water supply. So rolling up on the scene, got your water supply set, made that communications. What are you looking at? Say we're running a typical house fire. Let's say we're running a Cape Cod style house. We have plenty of those. What are some of the things that you're looking for? Obviously you got smoke showing or fire showing. What is the first things that you're going to do as an officer that you have to do to make sure that everybody knows?
Even with a seasoned driver, I still like to tell them to pull past, because everybody from time to time, it'll hit everybody where you get the tunnel vision and you want to stop. And I know it's good for the operation, right? Leaving room from the truck and all that other stuff. But I really like pulling past. And I ask them to slow down just a touch too sometimes, because I want to get eyes on it and I want to see as many sides of the building as I can as we're arriving. And I'm cool with the crew. As soon as that air brake is popped, if the crew dismounts and does their thing, and I may stay in the cab just a couple seconds behind them to give my initial on scene report before people are yelling. It's kind of like the sterile command post idea. I can get my thought out and paint the picture for the incoming units before you head into the chaos, so to speak. And then from there, it's all eyes on the building until that 360 is complete. One of the there's a couple things I want to hit on. One of the big things is you specifically said Cape Cod, which is great, but windows and doors, I think people kind of overlook or they're not familiar. And if you don't come from some sort of construction background, you might not notice it. But I think looking at size, shape, and type of window can tell you a lot about the interior layout of the building. So with just a little bit of studying and practice and experience, like you should be able to look at most homes and determine based off of the construction type and the type of house, right? Ranch, Cape Cod, 2-story, right? Whatever they call the typical 2 stories, colonials, whatever. You should be able to look at those different windows and for the most part know what kind of room is on the other side of that window. Most of the time, bedroom windows look different from kitchen windows, look different from bathroom windows. And then while you're doing your 360, I like to use my tick. I will actually, not the whole time, right? I'm not staring at the tick for the entire 360, but each side of the building, I'm giving it a quick glance as I'm going around, checking the camera, because you might see some different heat signatures that aren't visible to the naked eye. And there's a lot. You want me to keep going or you want to touch on some of the stuff I already said?
I want to elaborate on the windows because I think that's important. Think of the new firefighter if it's maybe just getting ready to get into fire one and they're thinking like, well, what do you mean by windows? What are you talking about? Elaborate on some of the windows with size wise and what you can expect on the other side of that window based on what it is. Because I think that's important. And I think that's a good trick of the trade.
Yeah. And again, it determines on the style of house that you're running. And it's also not 100%, right? It's just a general term, generally speaking, on the front of a house or the alpha side of a house. If you have really large windows, big picture windows or bay windows on the ground level, that's usually going to be a living room. Bedroom windows are typically going to be what everybody thinks of as a normal window, right? Usually 3 to 4 feet wide, probably less than 4 feet wide, but 2.5 to 3.5 feet wide, and anywhere from, I'd say, probably 4 to 6 feet tall. Usually, at least all these newer homes, there's a sash in the middle It's a double hung window. There's an upper sash and lower sash, all that. Um, Bathroom windows are typically higher or smaller in nature, or you can kind of tell just by looking at them, excuse me, that they don't open. You can look at windows between windows. So what I mean is, like, if you have a bunch of windows here on a lower level and a bunch of windows on an upper level, and then you have some in between, that's usually a good indication of a stairway. What else? Basements. So most basements are going to have some sort of window, like this one right here behind me. For those watching, I'm in my basement, and those basement windows, they're usually pretty small. Obviously, they go into the basement because they're at the ground level, but you can even peek in those, right, to get basement conditions and all that. Let's see. That's about all I can think of at the moment, but I'm sure more stuff with windows will come to me.
Yeah, and I think what's important, a lot of stuff you do, especially the stairwell window. That was one of the ones I'm thinking of. You've got windows in between windows, and they're usually a little bit smaller. That's just a light to let in on the stairwell. That stairwell may actually have like a return where it go up and it may take a left
Yeah.
turn or a right turn or whatever. One of the other things that I like to point out to people, especially in these like neo-colonial houses, these newer houses, you'll have the really big window that's above, like pushing the second floor and it's
Yeah.
above the front door. Don't go through that window because that window is going to drop you right down to the floor on the front door and you're going to land on the engine company that's up there. So just some things to think about
Yeah.
with those particular type windows. We talked about Cape Cod, but you also have false dormers that'll have windows in them as well. And, there's nothing on the other side of those. They may be, end up being just drywall on the other side of that. So, and they may be curtains up
Yeah.
there.
I'm sure there I'm sure there's some around. I haven't ran into any yet that are on like a single story where it's like a fake Cape Cod, but where we see them a lot in Frederick, the fake dormers are on townhouses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of, 3 to 4 story townhomes with the pitch of the roof towards the front, and then they'll put fake dormers in them that are for decoration. And it's nothing but unfinished attic space inside of them.
And you got to watch out for those because you got a good fire if it's burning up in the second floor in a bedroom, it breaches through the drywall. Those are just being held up by 2x4s out, and you can have that whole dormer come down on top of you. But
Yeah.
I think it's important that people understand, when looking at windows, part of your size up, looking at windows, where are we going to throw ladders and things like that? Where's the bedroom? One of the things that RJ and I talk about when we teach vent enter search, we talk about the crisscross method, doing that search is basically if you're looking at the front of a house on the side alpha and you've got a window on the outside wall, whether it be on the Delta side or the Bravo side, that's a bedroom. And if you go up to that window, the chances are that if the window is on that Delta wall, the door is diagonally across heading towards the Bravo Echo quadrant or Bravo side
Yeah.
Echo quadrant. Typically, I'd say 9 times out of 10, that's where you're going to find the door. And that's really handy knowledge to know when you're doing that vent enter search. So you can go in and shut that door right away. Head diagonally across, you may hit a wall, but you're going to hit that door. Very rarely do you find a bedroom door close to an outside wall. Just it doesn't work that way. You find a closet, but you're not going to find the bedroom door. So I think knowing those windows, having that little bit of knowledge tucked away is important. One of the other things that you talked about is the basement windows. There are times like my basement, my windows over there, but I don't have a walkout basement. My basement, the only thing I have that shows that it's a basement is that one basement window. So in order to get a good idea of what's going on in the basement, we'll talk about that here in a second with the 360, you're going to have to get down on your hands and knees with your flashlight and you're going to have to take a look in there. And if there's smoke that's coming out of there or it's smoky in the basement, you have to play it as that you got a basement fire. But like you said, you may have to crawl partially underneath of a deck to get to a window to be able to shine a light in there to see what's going on. It's very important. And let's talk about the 360. So you give that on-scene report. You talked about the sterile cockpit, which is important. And I tell people, I said, there's 2 components to your initial size, to that size up. The first one is that initial on-scene report. Some people call it a BIR, brief incident report. You're doing it from the front of the cab of the fire engine. So I tell people, I said, that initial report is everything you see through the windshield of that fire engine. That's the information that you give for your on-scene report. But it's important to do it inside on your mobile radio where you're not running around, where everybody can hear that initial on-scene report. Now you're getting off the rig. Your crews are pulling a line to the front door because you haven't told them to do anything different other than get a line. You're doing your 360. So you were fortunate enough. You talked about slowing down in the block. I used to do that on the truck company a lot because I wanted to see what was going on with the fire Where's the fire? Where am I going to put my ladders? Where are we going to start searches and things like that? And if you're coming from the Bravo side, moving past the Alpha side, and maybe parking on the Alpha Delta corner, you've seen three sides, but the listeners out there, don't fall into that false sense of security. Well, I saw three sides. All I got to do is run to the back real quick. You literally got to put your eyes on all four sides of the building. Even though you saw them coming up, you got to see what's going on. You got to look at the siding. You got to look at the roof line as you move around. So let's talk about your
Yeah.
360. What are you looking for? What are the important components that you're looking for? And why are we where we are today in Frederick with this?
Yeah. Let me start with this, that checking the three sides as you're moving up. For me, really the only thing I'm looking for there is smoke and flames. That it's that brief initial, whatever you want to call it. And then as I'm doing the 360, that's a little bit more detailed. Um, so obviously looking at the alpha side as I'm moving towards it. And then I try to do everything the same every time if possible. So I try to go Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta just to keep my flow, and looking for attached garages, obviously any victims that may be hanging out of windows. But for the building itself, attached garages, especially on the Charlie side, I'm looking to see the type of basement. That's something that we changed in Frederick, and I think it works really well, is identifying what type of basement you have, because that may change your initial tactics. Basement conditions. If you can locate utilities, that's great. Yeah, that, like I said, scanning with the tick, looking for heat signatures, smoke, all the floors. I don't know if I said it or not, but the number of floors on the Charlie side, I think, is a big one. Sometimes people miss. And then when I give my 360 report, I try to do it on the Delta side. I don't come all the way back to the Alpha and give it, because kind of like the sterile cockpit idea, once you get back to the front, that's where everybody's at. You've got other radios interfering with you. You've got, potentially civilians, other units arriving on scene. So I kind of tuck away on the Delta side, gather my thoughts real quick on what I want to say. I say it where I'm uninterrupted, and, people aren't there to get in the way, basically. And then I'll go meet up with the crew at the front.
And that's really good advice, because everything's happening in the front. People are carrying on. You're getting sucked into what's going on, and you're trying to give that report while you're trying to multitask at that point. But being on that last side of the
Yeah.
building that you saw to give that report, and you talked about the sides in the stories in the back. That's important too, especially when you're dealing with garden apartments and townhouses, where you may have two in the front and three in the rear. You may have three in the front and four in the rear with an apartment building. Same thing with a house. It might be one in the one story in the front, and you go to the back, and it's terraced, so you actually have a basement with a slider, and technically you're staring at two floors. It's still a basement, but now that 16-foot ladder, that 14-foot ladder ain't gonna hit that second floor. You're gonna have to pull 24 or 28 around the back. So it's important to throw
Yep.
that information out there for that secondary truck company. It's like, all right, if we're gonna hit the windows, it's terrace in the back, so I've got a basement and a floor above. We're looking at two stories in the back, including the basement, and that's important. I've heard people say, I got two stories in the rear with the basement. To me, that sounds like three floors. You know what I'm saying? Or it's two floors above the ground level, where it's actually only one floor above the ground level. So be specific with what you say. And like you said, you like to start the same way, start at the Alpha to Bravo to Charlie to Delta. Sometimes that can't happen, if there's a fence in the way, like they had on Ball Road. It still doesn't preclude you from having to do that full 360. You got to do it, whether you're hopping fences or you're breaking a fence or whatever. That's why it's important. You got to have a tool in your hand. Even if you got your tick, maybe you got your officers, maybe you got the Kelly bar, or you've got your Halligan bar or something, in case you got to scale a fence or break a fence or break a wooden fence or whatever, so you can get in the back. It's important to touch all those sides and then give that information. As an incident commander, what I'm looking for, and I know there's a lot of things that, and we talked about this in the top of the show, the lieutenant, that officer is responsible for so many things that are going on, not only in the cab. Once you arrive on the scene, you haven't put your face piece on yet, and you're still, you still got a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of work that has to be done for that 360, and there's a lot of things that need to be said, and you're going to miss stuff. We get that. As an incident commander, I'm concerned of the critical things. The critical things are, does it have a basement? Can you get into the basement? What's going on in the basement? That's what I want to know. If there's utilities back there, cool. If you forget to tell me that, I don't care. I'll clean that up when I get there. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people get hung up because the 15 things that you're responsible to say during your 360, you only said 14 of them, and now I'm going to call you out on the radio. As long as you hit those critical components. Now, if the fire is involving the utilities, it's probably important to say that the fire is involving the gas lines or something like that. But I'm more concerned about the critical stuff. Is there a pool in the backyard? Are there like 9 pit bulls in the backyard? A lot of these things, those things are important. But I tell people you got to physically get your hands on all sides of the building, because what you may see from a distance might be totally different when you get up close and actually see that, oh, there's a stairwell that goes down to that basement and I couldn't see it from the vantage point that I had. Or oh, this house, it's not on a slab. It actually does have a basement, or it is on a slab, whatever. Um, so all that stuff that you said is ridiculously important. And I like that little tip of, give on when you're on that last side, give that on that 360 before you go back around the front, because now you're going to be engaged in a whole bunch of other stuff. Um, I've always told my guys, get your face piece on, get yourself ready to go. You should be yelling at me, come on, Cap, get your shit together. Let's go. Let's go. You should be waiting on me. I shouldn't be waiting on you when I'm coming around. And I'm assuming you kind of operate in that same way.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even remember where that came from. I can't remember if that was a tip someone gave me previously, but I know I've witnessed it numerous times, both in trainings and on real incidents where that first officer is completing the 360. They come around to the front and they key up their mic, and then they immediately do a 180 and head back the other direction because they're being interfered with. So yeah, it's just something that I like to do. Seems to make things move a little more smoothly for me.
Well, I think it allows you, like you say, to gather your thoughts, and because you're going to have a lot of information that you have to give, and you really got one shot to do it. And what I tell people is, before you say anything on the radio, whether you're an incident commander or a lieutenant right in the front seat, take a look at what's going on, take a deep breath, hold it for a couple of seconds, let it out, get that adrenaline dump, get it out. Then you can key up your microphone and just give it in plain speak. All these people, it's funny. One of my pet peeves, the common phrase you hear, be advised this time and all that stuff is like, I tell people, I
I'm the
said, just
same,
talk
man.
on the
I
radio like
can't
you're going to
stand it.
talk to your kids minus the profanity, I say, when I go to my wife and I don't say, be advised at this time, what's for dinner? You know what I'm saying? I'm just talking plain speak. That's all people need to hear. I've got, I've done my 360. I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, and I've got this, and just plain speak. You don't have to gussy it all up to try to sound all smart and shit on the radio, because all you're going to do is sound dumb, because you've got 1,000 other things that are going through your mind. So as the officer, are you first in the door, or are you going in? We got the lineman going in. Are you behind the lineman and then the backup guys behind you, or do you put the two in the front and then you come up to the rear? How do you operate?
I like to go ahead of the crew. And I don't mean like way ahead. I'm not going super deep into the building without them, but they call us leaders, right? And we always say that leaders should lead from the front. And I think that applies to this as well, especially, some other departments might be a little bit different, but for us, the company officer has the thermal imaging camera. So if I want to use the camera as my tool to figure out where we need to go, why would I be in the back trying to direct somebody, right? When I can be in front of them with the tool that's allowing us to see. And then I can even show my nozzleman the camera. That's something I really appreciated. The officer I worked with at Station 2, he was really big on that. He would go in kind of ahead or stay right to the side of you and you were the nozzleman, and he was constantly holding the camera where you could see it and he could see it at the same time. So, I kind of took the cue from him, and that's what I like to do. I lead the crew in and I will direct where I want that hose line to go.
I was the same way. I liked going in first, and then I like kind of like being like right beside him, maybe slightly ahead, but like I can look over my shoulder and like this way, come around a corner or whatever,
Yep.
then kind of get out of their way if they had to cut a corner to hit the fire or whatever. But I was the same way. I like being, if not next to my lineman, just slightly ahead where I could just turn around and talk to him. If you're in the back, they can't hear you anyway, because by that time it's muffled, it's noisy and whatnot. So yeah, that's exactly the way I operated. The truck company, it was like, you go there, you go there. We'll all meet back in the middle. If we're dropping a search, obviously it depends on your crew and how much how much seniority they have, and how long they've been in. what you can talk to them. What about some tips for maybe a little bit of tricks for garden apartments? We've got a ton of garden apartments in Frederick. Some new, some old. In the city, you got old, and then in the city, but like on the outskirts, you're getting a lot of new construction, especially in one's area, a lot of new garden apartment construction. So, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can pass on about garden apartments and how to navigate those a little bit easier?
I think the biggest thing is you have to know how they're laid out. So if you have garden apartments in your first due, it's important because every complex is different. There's courtyards, hydrant locations, and so for an example, when I was at Station Two, there was this garden apartment complex that had it's like a big circle, right? And it was a giant courtyard in the middle. There was I forget exactly how many, like 8 or 9 different buildings that go in this big circle. It's one street, but there's a giant courtyard in the middle of them. So if you have to get to the Charlie side, depending on which hydrant you're taking, because there was only a couple of hydrants in that loop, like you may have to make a really long stretch. So knowing that and being able to communicate that to your crews that are going to go to the rear, I think is pretty important. And then knowing the layout. So I think most garden apartments around the region are fairly similar in the layout. But when you get into those apartments during your med locals or, your ambulance runs or other types of pre-plants, whatever, those apartments from floor to floor are pretty much going to be identical. And then on the other side of the stairwell, they're going to be mirror imaged, so to speak. So you can really use that to kind of determine where you need to go once you enter the door.
That's exactly what I would tell people, especially take advantage of those medical locals. Get
Yeah.
what does a 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom look like? Where are the kitchens? Where's the bathrooms? Things like that. And then, like you said, the apartments that are next door, they butt right up to each other, and it's a mirror image of what you were just in. And then you go to the floor above, it's the same way. Some of the characteristics about garden apartments that people need to take away from this is that, being that they're stacked, it is not uncommon to have a fire at a terrace level and have smoke or fire in the attic, when they're running those pipe chases. I've run a handful of garden apartments in my time when I was in Montgomery County, and the fire had started in the terrace level, and it had worked its way up through those pipe chases and kitchen fires. Typical food on the stove. Everybody thinks, it's just food on the stove, but if that shit got up into the you need to go to the floor above and maybe even check the apartment next door, because those are just avenues. They share those common spaces. Same thing in the bathrooms. You get a fire in the bathroom,
Yeah.
like in a vent fan. You get a good vent fan that's on fire. You're going to have to start checking. The apartments next door as well as up, and you got to get to the attic. I don't care if you have food on the stove, with a little bit of extension to the cabins. Somebody needs to go to the attic, pop that scuttle, and get up in there. Because if there's smoke in the attic, that means that there's smoke the floors above, and you're gonna have to start checking those floors above. You start skimping on that. You start playing it off that whatever. You're gonna come back 2-3 hours later, and the fire's gonna be spectacular. It might make the front of a magazine or something, but that's not what you want. But so we got about 10 more minutes, and I want to talk a little bit about your business and your strap and what it does. But I want to talk about, I know where it came from. I know how the idea came about. You got the little bar napkin and how you drew it up, and it started off from that little concept. What motivated you to get to make this and to refine it to where it is today? What was there a watershed moment, or is it just one of those, we're trying to use webbing and we're fumbling through it. There's a better way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mix of everything, but I would say the biggest catalyst was the line of duty death that we had in our department with Josh Laird, and that just everything about that incident, which I wasn't a part of, I wasn't on that fire, but a lot of it just didn't sit right with me because I know how well trained our people are, especially when it comes to the RIT stuff. And talking to my friends who were hands on Josh and making the rescue, the troubles that they had with packaging, no fault of their own. They're solid firemen. But I'm just thinking that our very basic that we teach with, the waste belt conversion and stuff like that, it's not feasible on a lot of people who are larger in size or their pack might be, worn a certain way, like the waste belt's not, you know, strapped or whatever the case is. Sometimes it's not as simple as just putting it between the legs and making the connection. And one of the things I carried for a long time was a pick off strap, and we see it a lot in RIT trainings. People using a pick off strap for packaging, but I also ran into the problem with those that they weren't big enough, or it's not easy enough to find that buckle. So on your SCBA shoulder strap, where you can cinch your shoulder straps down, you got those little adjustment buckles that sit under your armpits, and those can be hard to find depending on how that down fireman is laying. A lot of times they're laying on top of them. You get to it easily, even though it seems like a really simple concept of clipping it. You can't get to it easy. So all those things, everything was just running through my mind after the ball road incident. And I'm not saying that the strap I developed would have changed anything with the incident, but it just got my mind working, right, on how can we make it better. And so it's a little bit longer than your typical pickoff strap, and it's built in a way that with gloves on and low visibility, you can kind of feel the different components of the strap. And then I don't know how the idea came to me. It literally just entered my mind about extending it and adding the handles. And that's, what I quickly wrote down on the bar napkin and the beer coaster, and went to work with designing it and testing it. But yeah, I mean, so basically the idea came from a culmination of those things.
It's I played with it a bunch of times, obviously. It is simple to use. I was on the committee when we were doing the Ball Road report. I was in Montgomery County at the time. Chief Coe had talked to Chief Goldstein from Montgomery County and asked, would it be okay if I was on the committee, wanted me on the committee. And one of the things that we noticed right away, we sat in on the interviews with NIOSH, and they interviewed the guys, and they asked all the typical questions, and we took notes of who we wanted to re-interview. And one of the questions that I asked the two guys that got a hold of him right away, I said, did you try it for the DRD, the drag rescue device that's in the back of the coat? And they said they tried twice to grab it, they couldn't find it, and they weren't wasting any time. It just manhandled them right out. So I wrote that down, and I asked the guys from NIOSH, I said, is this common of that DRD not being used? And they said, we hear it more and more that people have tried to use the DRD, but they couldn't get it with their gloves because it was Velcroed in. So that's where your strap comes into play, and you've ended up with the big clips on there so you can use them with gloves. But we told NIOSH, and we put the blast out to these gear manufacturers, figure out a better way to make that DRD more accessible in zero visibility, under heat conditions, under stress, with gloves on. Figure out a way, because if you want that to be used, we have to be able to get it. Guys aren't going to sit there fumbling around for 3 or 4 minutes on an unconscious fireman trying to find that DRD strap. They're just going to manhandle them out of there. So until they crack that nut, which I don't think they have yet, your strap works very well. You've done a lot of training with it. We with Capital Fire, we've done a lot of training with it and got a lot of film, a lot of B-roll, by the way, for your filming on that for the strap. I think it fills that niche. That it's a small package. It can be Velcro to whatever, whether you're using a short board or a Stokes basket or a fast board or even your Scott Rit Pack or MSA Rit Pack. It can be right on there. Uh, I think that
Yeah.
it's
So you
it's
can,
good.
yeah, you can package with it, drag with it. You can hoist down firemen with it. I do tell everybody it's not the end all be all. It's not the only strap you need. I'm a terrible salesman because I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it is, but it's got a concept that we've proved through training. It works. So if you're interested in it, have an open mind, give it a go. And I think it's a great complement to your RIT stuff. And if you've got an easy rescue where you can grab and go, then by all means grab and go and don't mess with my strap. But if you got something that's a little more complex, especially a hoist, this is, in my opinion, it is the best option. It's the best option for hoisting because you can't hoist with a DRD and they're not rated for that. And they only go around the shoulders. I'm not going to call anything out by name, but the other devices out there, they don't work as well when you're going vertical. This creates that makeshift harness and it does it quick. You've got attachment points that keeps any ropes that you're using away from the helmet. So you're not knocking the helmet off. You're not knocking the face piece off. You're not choking them. It's where it really shines, man, is going vertical.
And it's another tool for the toolbox for your rapid intervention
Yep.
companies. Even if if you have to drag anybody a long distance, mass casualty incidents, stuff like that, where you got to grab people and go. Two
Yeah,
firefighters
it's
can
been
grab.
pretty cool to see some of the other people, like other concepts that they've come up with that I didn't even think of that they use it for. And I know that I don't want to put this out there too much, but I know it's been used on a couple EMS calls to help move people. of larger nature. Um, I know there was a rescue. Oh man, I can't remember off the top of my head where it was, but uh, they didn't have a good way to secure their Stokes basket to the tower. Which, if you have a tower, you should already have that figured out, I would think. But the one guy had it in his pocket, and he's like, "Hey, we can use this." So he pulled it out and fished it through the Stokes basket and attached it on both sides of the tower and cinched it down tight. And he's like, "It was solid. It wasn't going anywhere." So
Shameless plug. You got a couple of minutes. Tell people what it is, what it's called, and where they can get it.
yeah, so it's called the Hasty Rescue Strap. My company is called Hasty Fire Products. You can go to hastyfireproducts.com if you want to buy one. And you can follow me on social media, on Instagram. Everything is at Hasty Rescue Strap. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and then Facebook is the only one that's Hasty Fire Products.
When
But
this
yeah,
goes up,
I
it'll
try to post stuff and
right. You
yep,
do. You post a ton of stuff and getting lots of followers. But one of the things that when this video goes out, it'll go out on the 1st of September. It'll be on YouTube right down there in the description. I'll have all his information so you guys can just click on it. It'll be a hyperlink right to his website and put a crowbar in your wallet. Purchase it. It's for the
yeah,
guys. It's another tool for the toolbox. It's not big. It's pretty small, but it does a lot of stuff. So we only scratch
yeah,
the surface on sides of Hank and talking about houses and stuff like that. There's so many other things that we can talk about, but having that perspective from that lieutenant for the people that are listening to this that thinking, hey, you know what? I want to be an officer one day, or I'm going to be. I might be riding the seat. I might be at a volunteer house, and I'm a firefighter, but I can't drive. But the driver's there. I'm the next senior guy. I'm riding the front seat. So, given that those tips, those tricks to help somebody out, in the middle of the night to have that knowledge in their head now. And even for the seasoned officers, it's like, oh yeah, I never even thought about that. I've always gone up front and you try to key your microphone up and everybody else's radio starts giving you that digital feedback. You sound like an ass clown on the radio. So, maybe before you get back around the front where everything's happening, give that on scene report or give that 360 on that Delta side before you peek around the other side. So good tips, good tricks. To get people thinking. Don't rely on these electronic devices for maps. They're only as good as the input. Um, Paper maps, man. I don't think they're going anywhere. I live by them, and don't think that this is the digital age. We shouldn't be using paper maps anymore. It's like an axe. It always starts. That those paper maps, they're always going to work. If you lose all the power to your phone and to your computer, as long as you got a flashlight in the middle of the night and a map book, you can read it and tell people where they need to go. So, any last words, Hank, before we sign off?
yeah. I got one more quick plug I forgot to mention, if you don't mind.
Nope.
I also have a small podcast called Monday Meteorology. So I try to post on Mondays, but I may be changing that because I don't like being pigeonholed to just Mondays. But anyway, on that podcast, we talk Mayday stuff. So I try to have guests on who have either experienced a Mayday themselves or been part of a RIT team. That way we can talk about real world experiences and what, with them actually going through it, what they find is the most important lessons to pass on to other people. Because, fortunately, Maydays aren't happening to everybody, but they do happen enough that we need to learn everything we can about them.
I'll put the link to your podcast right there in the comments. Find them on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and you on YouTube yet?
Yep, yep. It's on
Okay.
YouTube too. Yep.
I'll be on there. So again, Hank, thanks for taking time out of your evening, coming on the show. I appreciate it. Until this will be going out in September. So until then, guys, be safe. You got any questions, you can reach me at sidealphaleadership@gmail.com. Drop a comment in my Instagram feed, TikTok, Facebook, or even on the YouTube channel. You can drop a comment right below. Good, bad, it doesn't matter. I'll answer it all. I have thick skin. I don't use my feelings. So Hank, again, thanks for being on the show. Be safe and see you on the Fireground.